What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you by the Hockey News. I'm your host, Emma Lingan. I'm joined today by Michael Augello and Kelsey Surmacz of the Hockey News. We've got lots of playoffs to talk about, so we're going to get into all of the storylines from the playoffs in bite-sized portions to get you all caught up on the action. But before we do, want to remind you that for over 75 years, the Hockey News has been the ultimate hockey fix. Now get 12 issues delivered straight to you, packed with stories, stats, and a bonus gift issue to kick things off. Head over to thn.com and get in on the action. All right, we got to start with Pittsburgh, Philly, because the Flyers, they have come out to a commanding and rather shocking 3-0 series lead over the Pittsburgh Penguins. Of course, they beat the Penguins Wednesday. They came from behind to win 5-2. It was the first playoff game in Philadelphia since 2018 where that happened. So pretty special for that market as well. Trevor Zegras, Rasmus Ristolainen, and Nick Seeler scored the 3 second period goals in 6 minutes. That was kind of where they pulled away from Pittsburgh in that game. And there were 9 different players who had a point in this game for Philly. So, Mike, does Philadelphia maybe have stronger depth than they get credit for? Because I mean, again, it's like the fourth line and the defense. That was who was contributing for them. So, who do you think has been the most surprising player for the Flyers in this series so far?
Well, I think they're younger. They're more energetic. They've been playing really solid defensively for probably the last 20 games of the regular season. And I think they've run up against a Pittsburgh team that, frankly, has looked old. And I'm a little surprised because I picked Pittsburgh to win this series, but you have to give full marks to Philadelphia, and Dan Vladar has played really great in net. But in terms of a guy who's really surprised me and sort of stepped up his play, it's Ristolainen. He's playing almost 25 minutes a night. He played really well at the Olympics for Finland. He's had a history of injury issues. He didn't get traded because there was a lot of talk of him being traded. And he's got 3 points in 3 games, which he's, the last time he was an offensive defenseman was when he was with Buffalo, and that was a long time ago. So, guys like Couturier, who I think have found the fountain of youth, have also been impressive. But, I think Kelsey will say, the youth of Philadelphia, I think, has been front and center in terms of why they're winning this series right now.
And we've talked about the value of that youth versus experience and how both can be valuable in the playoffs, but ultimately one's going to have to win out. And you mentioned Ristolainen. He was a guy, like you said, rumored to be on the trade market this year when the deadline came around and Philadelphia was kind of teetering on the edge of whether they were going to be contenders or not. So definitely an interesting development there. Kelsey, covering this series, obviously, as you have been closely, who to you has been the most surprising member of this Flyers team?
Well, I can't say I'm exactly surprised that Ristolainen is playing this well. He tends to always play pretty well against the Penguins, first of all. That's been a pretty good matchup for him historically. I think by far he's been their best player in this series. He's just doing so many things to contribute on both ends of the ice. Mike mentioned Philadelphia's defense. I mean, they're literally executing their game plan to perfection. He's been a big part of that. But the guy that surprised me most is Porter Martone. I mean, this kid has 2 goals and 3 points in 3 games. He picked up another assist last night. So, I mean, for a kid that basically came in a few games before the end of the regular season, he's looking like an NHL player in these playoffs, and he's looking like a guy who is a playoff kind of player. So I think he's been impressive. You mentioned the youth, you mentioned the depth on this roster. Philadelphia's gotten contributions from 15 different players on their roster so far in these 3 games. Pittsburgh's gotten 6. So that just speaks to how maybe unexpectedly deep this team is. But I think Martone kind of adds another element to that. I don't think necessarily that they were expecting him to be a contributor to the degree that he has so far. But he's really impressed me so far in this series. I think that adds a lot of shape to their lineup, adds a lot of depth to their 4-line attack. And like I said, they've just executed their game plan to perfection. They're doing all the little things right. They have a plan A, they have a plan B. and Pittsburgh just doesn't have an answer for them right now.
Well, like I said, a little surprising to see this development. I don't know that many people were expecting this series to be a blowout in either direction, but at least I think there was an expectation that Pittsburgh would be hanging in this fight a little bit better than they are right now. I mean, Kelsey, the Penguins were the highest scoring team in the NHL during the regular season. Meanwhile, they've got just 4 goals in 3 games during this playoff series, so they cannot find the back of the net. One of their goals came at even strength, 2 came on the power play, and 1 came in an empty net. So, I mean, what do you think, Kelsey, has been the biggest reason that Pittsburgh's offense has completely dried up during this series? And, what, if anything, is it going to take to get back into it?
I think it comes down to Philadelphia executing that game plan I was talking about, because the problem is, teams like this have given the Penguins fits all season. These teams that deploy a neutral zone trap, that stack their blue lines. You think about Carolina, you think about Ottawa. These are teams that Pittsburgh has struggled against, and the Flyers deploy a similar style. The issue is, when the Flyers get ahead and they establish a lead, they play that way. They don't give them anything. They're forcing Pittsburgh to play a dump and chase style that isn't suited to their offense. Pittsburgh has been thriving in transition all season. They've been thriving off the rush, and that's not something they've been able to accomplish against this team because they're stacking the blue line. So I think this is literally just a matchup result. This is great coaching on Philadelphia's part. But Pittsburgh can't score because Philadelphia is just not letting them. I think the biggest factor for them in this series has been that inability to get that first goal. They did get that first goal in game 3, but then things quickly turned. Like I said, Philadelphia kind of executed their plan B and started getting in the heads of the Penguins players, and that worked as well. So I just don't think they have an answer for Philadelphia's counterattack. Philadelphia's kind of, taking advantage of their mistakes as well and burying them. Their power play is also killing them. I know it had 2 goals in game 3, but it went 0-for-7 in the first 2 games and surrendered a shorthanded goal in game 2. It's been a mess. It looks dysfunctional. So they're just not generating enough high danger opportunities 5-on-5. They're not using the middle of the ice enough. And that's credit to Philadelphia just not allowing them to execute their game plan.
Well, you mentioned the Flyers getting into the Penguins' heads a bit. So I got to ask, Kelsey, what do you make of the embellishment penalty that was assessed to Sidney Crosby on Wednesday? I mean, what a wild game. At one point, 10 guys were in the box at the same time. I mean, what do you make of just kind of all of the extracurriculars that went on in that game?
Listen, I don't think either way, the Penguins did not play well enough. They didn't respond well enough to win the hockey game in game 3. But I do think there is a little bit of legitimacy to, some of these calls turning the tide of that game, because the Penguins controlled most of the first period. And then, near the end of that period, Crosby gets high-sticked before a face-off. I mean, this isn't even during gameplay. He gets clipped in the face-off circle by Garnet Hathaway, didn't see it coming, and it was a high stick to the face. Crosby fell to the ice a little easily, probably to make sure that the referee saw it. But at the end of the day, I'm of the opinion that if there's an actual penalty on the play, as there was in this situation, Crosby actually gets high-sticked in the face, there's no reason to call an embellishment play there. And it was interesting, too, because there wasn't an embellishment call, on the initial reaction by the refs. I think the crowd kind of played a factor here in getting that embellishment call as well. So it was just a strange situation all around. And then later, it's almost like they had this makeup call because Matvei Michkov got called for embellishment on a clear cross-check by Evgeny Malkin. So, they made it clear that they are ready to call embellishment in the series. That was Crosby's first embellishment penalty of his 21-year NHL career. And Sidney Crosby, for all of his reputation, especially in the city of Philadelphia, has not been a diver throughout his career. The record clearly shows that. And I just don't think the embellishment penalty was called for. And on top of that, you mentioned, the 10 guys in the box at the beginning of the second period. That was the turning point in this game. There was a little skirmish. Konechny gets an elbow up to Rust's face. Rust retaliates. And then there was also a kicking motion by Konechny. And somehow out of all of that, the Penguins are shorthanded. I don't understand it. There were two clear missed calls on Konechny there. He only got 2 for roughing in that situation. But that was the turning point of the game. And I got to tell you, taking all 10 players off the ice in that situation was quite a call because I don't think all 5 guys on both sides should have been sitting in the penalty box for sure. But that was a turning point in that game.
Yeah, I was watching that unfold, trying to keep track of everything that was happening. I'm thinking we're about to see some very interesting line combinations from both of these teams with everybody in the box at the same time. I mean, Mike, Kelsey said it, I think, with regardless of all the extracurriculars that happen in game 3, bottom line was that Pittsburgh did not play well enough to win the hockey game, and they haven't played well enough to take a lead in this series. So what do you think has been, if you can try to even pinpoint what their issue has been against Philadelphia?
Well, first, tactically, I mean, you've seen teams like Toronto in the past, which were high-flying offensive teams, or the Sabres this year, when they come up against a Boston or a Tampa Bay who can play an effective defensive style and shut down the middle of the ice. They do not allow you to carry the puck into the offensive zone. So they make those teams dump and chase, and that's what's happening with Pittsburgh, and it's not working for them. They really can't dump and chase against the Flyers, and I think it's really hurt them in this series. As for the extracurricular activities, I mean, Paul Bissonnette on the TNT broadcast referred to it as scumbag hockey. And that's, right now, if you look at what's going on in the playoffs, Boston is going down in the dirt with Buffalo after, they were effective for all but 8 minutes of that, of the 2 games in Buffalo, and they came out with the split. Tampa Bay is getting down and dirty with Montreal. I mean, that's, that if not to say that you don't need talent to win, but you also need that extra curricular stuff that happens in the playoffs. And if you come out on the short end of the stick, and in this instance, I'm surprised that Pittsburgh did not have the discipline, especially with their experience, to not retaliate. And, the officials and their calls, that was a part of it too. And they got it wrong. But it's always the person who responds always gets the penalty. And in this instance, Pittsburgh got the penalty and then got the short end of the stick.
All right. Well, shifting out west, want to talk about Anaheim and Edmonton, another case sort of youth versus experience kind of showing in the playoffs here. So the Ducks evened up their series against the Oilers. They won 6-4 in game 2. Cutter Gauthier had 3 points. He scored twice, including the game winner with 4 minutes remaining in the third period. Alex Killorn and Jackson Lacombe also had 3 points each for Anaheim. Now, Mike, the Ducks have outscored a lot of their defensive issues throughout the regular season. But do you think that they can sustain this level of success against the Oilers the rest of the way? Because this is it's been a very streaky team for the reason I mentioned about having their defensive issues and having a lack of experience. But do you think that they're going to be able to maintain this level of play? Because they almost fell, not out of the playoff race, but they almost fell to a wild card spot at the end of the year.
There is no lead that is safe with the Anaheim Ducks, unfortunately. But that's a signal of just their youth and inexperience. Now, I think this could be a learning experience for them. If you look at the Edmonton Oilers and who they played in the past, they come up against a defensive-minded team like LA, and they beat them every single time because they have enough offense to supersede what the Kings were trying to do. In this instance, Anaheim can play offensively up to par with Edmonton, especially if a certain guy wearing number 97 isn't scoring any points. It's going to really come up to Dostal outplaying Connor Ingram and generating an offense. I mean, they were in the lead in game 1. They were leading 3-2 after 2 periods, and Edmonton came back in the third. In this game, they were up, and then it went from 4-2 to 4-4, and then they got the goal in the third period, and then they got the late goal to make it 6-4. So Anaheim is going to have to keep the throttle wide open if they hope to beat Edmonton.
Yeah, I mean, Kelsey, even if you look at the score, 6-4, I mean, they still allowed 4 goals to score. So they've got to be able to, again, outscore some of their defensive shortcomings. So what do you make of the first 2 games of the series? And do you think that Anaheim is going to have enough in the tank to see this through against Edmonton?
Mike kind of mentioned it. I think the matchup is an interesting thing here because, as he said, the Oilers kind of met their match with Anaheim in terms of another team being able to play a run and gun style, just kind of outscore. And a lot of this just hinges on the health of Connor McDavid, I think, and just if, he can play up to standard. I do think in terms of, the Ducks attack, it's impressive what they've managed to do and what some of these younger guys are managing to do for them. Lacombe's been fantastic. You mentioned it. Gautier's been fantastic. And I think, it'll be interesting to see if they flame out and if they can keep up, this same level. Because if Connor McDavid gets going, I have a hard time seeing them be able to sustain this. I mean, they outscored them 6-4 yesterday. Connor McDavid still has 0 points. If Connor McDavid gets going, I don't see any way they're going to be able to outscore them. But I think that's literally the factor in this series. But so far, I mean, they're showing that they can keep up with them in terms of the run and gun style, in terms of the track meet style game. So if they can just keep putting pucks in the net, we'll see. This could go to 7 games. But like I said, a lot of this hinges on 97. So we'll see what happens there.
We will see what happens indeed. And that's a good segue into, this next topic. I mean, Connor McDavid, like we said, has been held without a point in back-to-back games against the Ducks in this series. He also appeared to sustain a lower body injury in the second period. Of course, he played the rest of the game, but it did cause him to head to the dressing room for an extended period of time at that point. So he was visibly shaken up. I mean, he also had a huge turnover in his own zone that led to Ryan Poehling's shorthanded goal. So definitely not the vintage 97 that we've seen in this series, and particularly in game 2. Mike, what do you think Chris Knoblauch can do to try and get McDavid going? Just because we know how essential he is to this team. I mean, as he goes, the Oilers go.
Well, I think burning incense and praying that the injury is not that severe. They need number 97 to wear blue tights and a red cape to carry that team, because they're not very deep. They have experience. They've gone to 2 straight Stanley Cup finals, but we've seen the flaws in this team all year. The Tristan Jarry trade did not turn out. Now they're playing Connor Ingram in the playoffs, and he hasn't been the problem, but they're not a good team defensively. They expect to beat teams by the superb offense of 97 and Draisaitl, and Draisaitl came into the playoffs dinged up. If McDavid is dinged up as well, they could beat Anaheim even with them at less than 100%. But I think rules out them, getting by, Vegas or Utah, or getting by whoever comes out of the Central. So the long-term effect of him being dinged up, I think would be detrimental to their Stanley Cup hopes.
Yeah, and like you said, even a dinged up Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl is still better than 100% healthy, a lot of other players. So still, you can't take them completely out of it. But Kelsey, I mean, what do you think can be done to get McDavid going, assuming the injury isn't, something that is going to be insurmountable for him?
I think it's just one of those situations that Connor McDavid's really the only person that can get Connor McDavid going. I mean, he's being deployed in prime situations to, lend to him being able to produce, and he's just not doing that at this point. I mean, maybe you can try to get him some matchups that might be more favorable for him. But aside from that, I don't think there's really much Knoblauch can do in this situation. It's the it's on McDavid to really start getting going here. And I mean, I know we've talked about in the past, Leon Draisaitl on one-legged Draisaitl was a great playoff performer, but we don't know how one-legged McDavid works here. He appeared to injure his right leg on that play. So, I think, as Mike said, this affects their long-term outlook. If he can even get going a little bit, I do think the Oilers win this series, because once he does get going, it's going to be a little bit too much for Anaheim to handle. They're not strong enough defensively. They're not strong enough in goal. Basically the same issues as the Oilers. But the Oilers can absolutely still outscore this team if McDavid can get going. However, again, longer term, if you're looking ahead in the playoffs here, them both being injured is a major problem. If this injury is as severe as it seems like it might be, even though he's downplaying it. So, we'll see what happens. I think that it's on him to get going here and figure out a way to pull through. I think he will. But, in terms of Knoblauch and just what he can do to get him going, I don't think there's much more he can do other than maybe just giving him some more favorable matchups. Other than that, it's just seeing what he can do the rest of the series. And if he turns it on, I don't think Anaheim's going to advance here.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about Anaheim outscoring their defensive issues. I mean, that's kind of the Oilers' MO as well, is outscoring defensive issues. So it is an interesting matchup. Like you said, if we can get 97 going, it could take a turn pretty quickly. I want to talk about another series in the West, Dallas and Minnesota. So Dallas now has a 2-1 series lead, really kind of out of character, just blowout loss for Dallas in game 1. They responded in game 2. It was a little tighter game. And then once again, another tight game in game 3, went to double OT. They ended up defeating Minnesota. Again, Wyatt Johnston was the hero this time. He scored the double OT winner, and the Stars' big guns came up just all throughout game 3. I mean, Matt Duchene and Jason Robertson each had 3 points. Johnston and Mikko Rantanen each had 2 points. So, I mean, Mike, this series has lived up to the hype so far, I think, if you exclude game 1 from that conversation. But with the Stars' top players heating up and Minnesota dealing with injury issues, which we'll talk about as well, I mean, do you think that the tides may shift in favor of Dallas for the rest of the series?
Just when you think Dallas or one team is dominating the series and has the momentum advantage, it changes. I mean, these are two very they're two very talented teams, two of the top teams in the league. I'm sure Gary Bettman is saying, oh, hey, this first round is great because Dallas and Minnesota are putting on a great show, folks. Well, yeah, this should be a conference final and not a first round series. But I mean, the key in this game, I mean, was Dallas scoring 3 power play goals and getting 2 penalties in double overtime to finally wrap it up. And I was up until like 1:30 in the morning watching this. But a lot of questionable calls, but in a tight series, in a physical series, that's what's going to happen. I mean, I fully expect Minnesota to bounce back in game 4 and even up the series, and then it's a best of 3. It's going to be a pitched battle all the way till probably a 7th game, and then it's a flip of the coin of who's going to win.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to come up with a more evenly matched series than this one. I think, Kelsey, what do you think has to happen? I mean, or what do you think does happen? Do you think, because like Mike said, it seems like the momentum shifts have been so fleeting in this one that it's really hard to know. But I mean, if Dallas continues to play in the way that they have, and if their top guys continue to be their top guys, which has kind of been an issue in past playoffs. So it's something you want to see from them, but how do you see the rest of the series going?
Well, I think you said it, Dallas's top guys are really starting to turn it on. And, going into this series, I thought a big factor for Dallas was going to be the health of Mira Heiskanen. And he's been playing like Mira Heiskanen in this series. He's been a big X factor for them. And that was something, that was kind of on my radar, because if he wasn't able to play up to his capability, I think this could have been a little bit different. I think it's still going to be a back and forth series, like Mike said. I really like the Wild in this series, but I think he's kind of been a big factor too, along with those other players that you mentioned. Obviously, Robertson's turned it on with 3 goals, 5 points. Johnston's been really good. He was really good in this last game for them. Also 3 goals, 5 points. So, those guys are really turning in key performances. They're getting the contributions from the big guys. But I think Heiskanen playing up to his capability and not really showing too many signs of wear or injury up to this point is a really big deal for them. So, as long as those guys can keep performing the way they are, I think that Dallas could probably take this one. I still think it's going to go 6 or 7 games because these teams are just so evenly matched, like Mike said. But, I think their stars showing out and, giving those performances that have maybe been lacking in the past is a really big deal for them. And I think it could take them far, especially, like I said, if Heiskanen's healthy and maybe they can get back in at some point too.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because for Dallas, health seemed to be one of the biggest factors. I mean, not just Heiskanen, but Roope Hintz was injured, and they've dealt with a lot of injuries, not just this year, but in past playoffs too. It seems that has been kind of what's hampered them, and so we thought injuries and health was going to be the biggest concern for Dallas. But now Minnesota is the one that has really caught the injury bug. I mean, they've got injuries to Yakov Trenin, Matt Zuccarello, both of them missed game 3. Of course, Trenin is one of their biggest hitters, the biggest hitter that they have, one of the best in the league. And, we knew that Zuccarello was out from the previous game, and both of their status for game 4 now is unknown. Joel Eriksson Ek briefly headed to the locker room as well in double OT, but he did return to the bench before the game ended, but we still don't really know. We don't have an update on his injury status. So, Mike, we've talked about Minnesota before as, they're a very defensively sound team, and that includes the defensive play of their forwards. And I think guys like Trenin, Eriksson Ek, big pieces of that. So even if they don't have these guys fully at 100% health, or maybe they might not have them healthy at all, they might not be playing. What do you think the Wild need to do in order to even this series up in game 4 and actually, make it go the distance?
Well, you can't say that they need to rely more on their key players, because if you look at the game last night, you had Quinn Hughes playing over 40 minutes. It was 5 periods. Brock Faber played just under 40 minutes. They leaned heavily on Eriksson Ek and Boldy and Kaprizov. So they're playing their best players and they're playing them often. What often makes the difference between winning and losing is getting production out of those third and fourth liners. Now that Trenin's out, maybe a guy like Michael McCarron, who has scored a goal in the series. I mean, they seemed intent at the deadline to adding beef to their lineup. They added McCarron, they added Nick Foligno, and they knew they were going to face Dallas, and they knew they would have to punish Dallas. And I think they're trying to do that, but they seem to be absorbing more of the punishment, and some of their key players are out. And if they lose any more, if like Eriksson Ek is out of the lineup, then I think Dallas has the distinct advantage.
I mean, to see Yakov Trenin, who is built like a brick house, go down from a hit from Colin Blackwell, of all people. I think you just kind of see that size isn't always everything in these matchups, but you can be physical without having the size advantage. You mentioned McCarron, beautiful goal in game 2 or game 3 rather, against Dallas. So, could come down to those depth pieces. But Kelsey, I mean, what do you think the Wild need to do to actually crawl back into this thing?
Mike said it. I mean, they just need more contributions from the depths in their lineup. I mean, Tarasenko and Foligno have essentially been non-factors up to this point. They really need to get going here in order for them to have a shot, especially if Eriksson Ek is out. So, they're already relying a lot on Boldy. They're already relying a lot on Kaprizov. Obviously, the blue line is a big factor here too. But there's also the risk, if you play those guys too many minutes, they might flame out. Fatigue might become a factor. So at some point, you need to get those contributions from the guys like Foligno and Tarasenko. And just so far, they haven't been able to get that. So I think Eric Senek's health is going to be a huge factor in this series. If he's out, I don't think, Minnesota has much of a chance to really outscore Dallas in this series. And on top of that, they just need to lock down more defensively too. I mentioned, some of these teams that were playing a neutral zone style trap earlier. Minnesota kind of deploys a similar type of thing. And they're just going to have to lock down, make sure they get ahead early, get that first goal, and then play pretty perfect prevent defense. So, they're going to have to get creative if Eric Senek isn't in the picture, because he's obviously such a huge part of their lineup. But at the end of the day, they just need more contributions from guys who simply have been too much of a non-factor so far.
All right. Well, Mike, want to wrap up talking about, of course, the Buffalo Sabres, who are tied in their series with the Boston Bruins right now. Looking at everything that has unfolded, obviously the streak, the playoff-less streak, the playoff drought, whatever you want to call it, has finally come to an end in Buffalo. And we've talked in the past at length about Buffalo maybe not being the most attractive destination for free agents, for trades, for various reasons. So I want to revisit something from the trade deadline this year. If we will recall, Colton Parayko did not accept a trade to the Buffalo Sabres at the deadline from St. Louis. He blocked the trade using his no trade clause. So based on what you've seen, Mike, from the Sabres' other trade acquisitions and impact that they've had on this team, not only down the stretch, but then in the playoffs as well, do you think that Buffalo would have been better with Parayko on their team, or do you think they need him?
I think they would have definitely been better. Their defense, you probably would have had Owen Power or Bowen Byram moving down to the third pairing, because Parayko probably would have fit in on their second pairing, being a Stanley Cup winner and a right shot defenseman. He would have lengthened their lineup on the blue line. But I mean, the way the whole thing was approached, and not to go back, but Parayko was never going to accept a trade to Buffalo, and it wasn't anything to do with Buffalo. It was to do with the fact that he had a no move clause. He took less on an 8-year deal to stay in St. Louis because of a personal situation. And, if they're intent on trading him, he wants to choose where he wants to go. And at that point, Buffalo is not a place he wanted to go. I don't think it was anything against, there are no palm trees in Buffalo. We get that. But, I think, maybe Parayko would have been that piece that was missing with the Sabres. But when you have a goaltender that lets in a shot from center ice, I think your problems are bigger than whether Colton Parayko decided to go to Buffalo or not.
Yeah, definitely would have, like you said, lengthened the defensive depth. I mean, when you've got a guy like Luke Schenn as your seventh defenseman, a Stanley Cup winner there as well. They've got the depth, but to get more depth on that right side, like you said, never a bad thing. Kelsey, what do you think? Do you think this Buffalo team would be better with Colton Parayko? Do you think he would have been maybe a needle mover or the needle mover, at least in this first round series against Boston?
I wouldn't say the needle mover. I mean, maybe a bit of a needle mover, as Mike mentioned. I mean, this does bolster the depth on that right side. Probably pushes Byram down to the third pairing. And, I think they could do a little bit better than Connor Timmins at the bottom of that lineup. But, it's interesting because with this whole situation, he declines the trade to Buffalo. Mike mentioned the palm trees thing. You respect a decision like that, and at the time it made sense. Colton Parayko is probably regretting this a bit, I would think, because the Buffalo Sabres are flying high in the playoffs right now, and he's sitting at home. So, on that end of it, I think he probably wishes he was in this lineup. But as to Mike's point, I don't know how much of a difference it actually would have made in this series. He mentioned the goaltending. That's obviously a concern. And this Boston team is just a stingy team. It's tough to play against. The issue for Buffalo is going to be generating offense. So against this Boston team. So in terms of that factor, maybe he helps a little bit on the back end and in the transition game. But in terms of what their needs are in this series, I really just don't think he would have been that much of a factor to whether or not they were going to win the series or be able to push through, because this is a tough Boston team. Again, they're a stingy team. And in terms of generating offense, that's the main thing that they need to do in this series. And, they need more of it. So I think would have helped the back end, but not necessarily been a huge difference maker here.
Yeah, talk about the goaltending. I mean, at one point, it felt like Buffalo had 15 goalies on their roster. You would have thought one at least would have stuck and been able to carry them in the playoffs. But of course, you got game 3 of that series tonight. We're going to be here throughout the rest of the playoffs, bringing you all the latest and greatest news. And of course, if you want to read any more about any of the games, the matchups, players, teams that we've talked about today, head over to the Hockey News. It's been the go-to for all things hockey since 1947. 12 issues packed with game and player insights, plus a free issue to start, is a must-have for any fan. Head to thn.com/free and grab your subscription today. That is going to do it for today's episode of The Wraparound. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We really do appreciate it. We'll be back with an all-new episode next week. For Michael Augello and Kelsey Surmacz, I'm Emma Lingan. This is The Wraparound, and we will see you next time.